Good morning, it's Charlene SanJenko, and I'm pleased to welcome you to another Gather for Her conversation, where we meet on Wednesdays to explore and share and learn collective wisdom that is in our virtual room that we're meant to hear at this time. And it's a very important conversation today, as it is every week. I would like to welcome you officially. I am hosting from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish First Nation on the beautiful Sunshine Coast. And I'm very pleased to be hosting this conversation with my braid, as I lovingly call them, my two co-hosts. And I'm gonna ask Christina and Tina to introduce themselves this morning.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here, and welcome to some of the new faces that we're seeing. We're so pleased that you're here. My name is Christina Benty, and I'm joining you from Golden, BC, which is the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa and the Shuswap. In my work, I work with local governments. I work with elected officials on how to navigate the system of government that they're elected to, and how to make themselves relevant within that system. So my work is ever evolving and very interesting to me. So I gain a lot of wisdom from these conversations that actually informs my work. So thank you.
Good morning. So nice to see everyone this morning. I'm Tina O. I'm coming to you from Nechwelachum, which is on the traditional and ancestral and unceded territory of the Squamish people. I sit today in a space of gathering, listening, tracking in deep honor of the story of us. It feels thick and beautiful today. So thanks for being here. It's so nice to see wonderful faces. You're all wonderful. Is Sharon with us today?
Sharon is not able to be with us today, so each conversation is graphically recorded through an Indigenous lens by our fourth PowHERhouse, Sharon Marshall, our sister from Vancouver Island, and she's not able to join us live today, so she will be listening to the recording. And I just acknowledge Sharon for her gifts and what she brings to each conversation. I want to also acknowledge, before I introduce our special guest today, that a few things that are on my heart, and then we'll dive into the conversation. Nothing is by accident, so I am trusting that this is meant to be where I go this morning. First of all, I want to honor that it's Orange Shirt Day, and I actually just want to reflect that we wear orange shirts on September 30th to honor the lives of more than 150,000 Indigenous children that were taken from their homes and their families and forced to live in residential schools, with the slogan that we hold close, that every child matters. And this week here in my province, a young teenager was discovered in a care home after being there in his closet for 4 days. And that's not good enough. And yesterday, a 37-year-old mother of 7 children, so younger than I, with 7 kids, died in a hospital where she went for care. And it was picked up on recording because there's a story there that we're meant to talk about. And that's not good enough. And we keep flipping in the same circle. And we keep thinking that we're evolving. And I'm going to push that today a little bit, because today is about realizations of what we're learning and what we're seeing, and how to take this time to actually move forward. Heaven forbid that we should actually move forward and upward to a higher level of living and what it means to be a human being. And I've had some pretty deep conversations with a friend and a mentor, a confidant that is joining us today. Rakia Sadie is someone that I hold near and dear, and I always, you know, before we started today, she explained a story about teaching, you know, young entrepreneur students in Okotoks and how that came to be. But that's so indicative of who she is as a leader in the world. I saw the post on Facebook where she literally said, does anybody need any help? And I was like, number one. Number two, I'm like, oh, maybe I should let someone else answer this. So without further ado, I want to welcome our special guest today, Rakia Sadie. And Rakia, I will introduce you, but I'm going to ask you to add to it with what's on your heart today. She's a published author, respected pundit, and a gifted public speaker. She's a leader of her own right and also a strategist for leaders across the country and across the globe. And today, our conversation, to kick it off and invite that collective wisdom, is all about ready for more. And today we're focusing on more realizations for the return. Good morning, Rikia.
Hi, Charlene. Thanks so much for having me here. And so nice to meet everybody and see some friendly faces in the crowd. Thank you so much. I am speaking from Musqueam territory, but I grew up in Treaty 8 territory in northern Alberta, and somehow managed to go from there to London, then Paris, then New York, grad school in Arizona, and I now make my home in Vancouver. And in that career, which started in government and went to advertising, I was part of the Saatchi Empire in New York City. I reported to 156 CEOs in 147 countries, and I worked on global new business pitches, but I also did a lot of trend reporting. What were going to be the new things coming out in order to kind of fold the network together. And I think I've been doing a lot of that ever since. And as soon as COVID broke out, I found myself as part of a think group in London with some really great minds that were focused from the very beginning on the Build Back Better movement. I think that's a great name for it. People talk about the new normal or when will things return to normal, and I don't think there's ever going to be a normal again. And I also think that's okay. It's scary from where we sit. These are hard times. I live in a house of boys. There are challenges and we're all facing them, and we miss our loved ones and we struggle with things. But at the same time, when we let go of the doom scrolling, which I'm as guilty of as anyone else, there are some truths that are happening that show so much promise and potential for us getting to a better world. And I'm really excited and optimistic and enthusiastic about that. And so I'm happy we have a chance to talk today. Thank you,
Rakia. I think it's very interesting to actually be looking at this conversation. I love even the word of a think tank and actually coming together as global leaders and observing the trends that are happening, that we have the ability to move forward, to have some realizations. And I'm kind of curious, I'm going to toss it to my co-hosts to just kind of share what I think you've both met or definitely heard of Rakia before. I'm curious what's coming up for you and just in terms of helping to kick off the conversation. What's in front of you right now? Maybe Christina and Tina, just feel free to jump in and we'll get it launched.
Well, I'm super curious to hear about what Rakia has to say about what some of the systemic shifts, what are the disruptions in our systems, what are some of the underpinnings that we need to be aware of, and how can we contribute to meaningful systemic change. And I love what you said about building back better, and that there's actually a lot to be optimistic about, which is a really interesting thing to say, given that we're in Canada moving into the darker period of time, right? Like the days are getting shorter, it's getting colder, there's an awareness, oh my goodness, I'm gonna be indoors more. And so there's some growing anxiety, and yet there's so much to be optimistic about. And so how do we stay really present for ourselves and for others, and contribute to the systemic shifts that need to take place?
That's a great question. You know, I love the picture you posted. Like when you said darker times, I wasn't feeling it. And then I thought, oh, you mean like darkness, like actual, the sun is not going to be around much. And you're right. But I haven't met anybody who didn't need the great pause, who didn't find their life somehow enhanced or enriched by it, who wasn't just running frantically from work to trombone lessons, to soccer practice, to like book club, and just never taking a moment to breathe. And I think our social calendars being pared back, and our life calendars being pared back has been a bit of a gift. And I'm going to challenge you to say, I think hibernation will be too, because we have a lot of big things to talk about. When I talk about systemic change, and I really am a systems thinker, I don't mean, you know, oh, there's going to be less commercial real estate, oh, more people moving to the suburbs, those kinds of trends. I'm talking about the shift in consciousness that we're going through. And one of those things is an idea that I came up with, that I started to notice a year ago, and it was this idea of reverse assimilation. I was doing some work with Reconciliation Canada, which is the most beautiful organization ever. Their mission, their vision of reconciliation is when an Indigenous child can walk down the street with the same dignity, respect, hopes, and dreams as any other child. And I don't know anyone who doesn't want that. And so working with them and seeing their frame, their worldview, I realized this is what we're all striving for. And it's right here in front of us, and it's being ignored. And what I came to see is that a lot of the information we need exists, and it exists in people who haven't had the power to be heard. And so, you know, in politics, we talk about women's issues, you know, healthcare, education, to say something like a shift in consciousness, you know, these were all women's issues. Well, I can tell you, I actually had a male CEO who owns 7 companies, sat next to him on a flight, and he talked about his wife and what a great advisor. He thought, you know, I could really use you as a business strategist. I only have my wife. She talks to my angels for me. And we didn't used to have this kind of conversation in the business world. That's not a business class conversation. But Indigenous wisdom is so important. You know, the Iroquois Confederacy is what informed our own democracy. It's the oldest living participatory democracy on earth. I have friends traveling to South America for ayahuasca rituals. I have people going on pilgrimage and searching, and we have all of that here at home in Indigenous wisdom. And if we just could turn around, we would see that, again, in so many ways, we're already at the front of the line. We just have to listen. And then now, you know, we've gone from that to what I'm calling the great flip. Modern economic theory, if you Google modern economic theory, it goes against everything you've been taught about how the world works or how the economy works. And it's why so many global leaders are using this crisis as an opportunity to create more equity in the world, because the entire economic system has been reframed for them in a way that they are coming to see that if you own your fiat currency, if you have control of your central banking system, if interest rates are 1%, your potential to help your people is infinite. And so that's exciting. Before the Great Pause, we talked about CEOs and sports stars, and you know, they were the wealth creators, and celebrities, right? The rich and the famous. And after COVID, we started talking about frontline workers. We started thanking our grocery store clerks. We started cheering for nurses and doctors. And so really, you don't get this feeling when you're scrolling through your social media feed, but the conversation around whose voice matters and what matters has had a complete flip, and any discombobulation you're feeling is probably a really healthy thing as you begin to assimilate that into your worldview, into your body, into your way of being in the world. So I have nothing but hope.
Wow. 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 As so Rakia, what you need to know about me is, so as a myth person, and I don't mean myth like made stuff up, I mean like
The great myths.
the great myths. I tend to occupy the seat of comfort in the underbelly, right? Or in the underworld, right? And so I just love listening to you because it lifts me so much. I don't live in the underworld. I'm just really comfortable there. So thank you for that. And from a story lens, where I'm hoping you can help us get into, because I think you just so beautifully took us into what I call Act One, which is like Act One in a story, if you will, is where are we? Where are we? Like, what do we know? What do we know we don't know? And then Act Two in any conversation is, okay, let's go into the unknown. And I'm wondering, you said two things that I just loved. You said, so we had before the great pause, you know, we were in this place of doing what we were doing, all the things. And then after the great pause, we started talking about frontline workers. And I'm wondering, in this place of the flip of the assimilation and the worldview after the great pause, what do you see?
Okay, I have to ask you.
Yes.
What's Act 3?
Oh, the new known.
Okay.
It's the new known.
This is exciting.
There you go, story 101.
We must have been speaking in the ethers for sure before this happened. So the question is, what do we know? Okay, this is where it gets really exciting. When we scroll social media, all we see is division. We talk about how the world has never been more polarized, but in fact, I think we're at peak polarity, and I think it's only getting better from here. And I think that we're going to be moving into something that I call the Great Reconnection, where we worry about alliances rather than division, because we are living in a time where like nothing can be accomplished alone. Everything has to be accomplished together. In 2008, I spoke at the Global Youth Assembly, and these are kids. I did a presentation called Marketing for Good, Not Evil. These are kids who are already changing the world. They're not hoping to change the world. They're already starting companies and organizations, even something as simple as organizing all the kids in their high school to shovel walks for their elderly neighbors all winter long, which is a beautiful Alberta initiative. So somebody asked me the question, how do we help the environment? I was like, well, first of all, you work together. Because if you want to help the environment, you can go species by species, like save the owl, save the whale. You can go habitat by habitat, save the Great Lakes, save the peat bog, whatever. You can go region by region, or you can go globally. And all these organizations are competing against one another, time and money and resources and attention. And what we need to do is start coming together. And I did some research for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I remember presenting it. And one of the presenters came up to me afterwards, and she said, and as I tell you the story, I want you to think in your work world or in your family world, how does this apply to you? Because I think it applies to all of us. And she said, I need your help. I'd like to start an organization to save bees. And I'm like, great. First thing you do is find another organization that's already trying to save the bees and see what you can do to help them. And she said, oh, no, I can't do that. Because there's this organization, but they're focused on this species of bee. And then there's other organization, but they're really just focusing on the Lower Mainland. And then it was like all these reasons why people can't work together. And I think that we had the technology to work together and to collaborate much more than we had been doing. And the gift of COVID is that it has us using those technologies. We're all on multiple Slack channels. We're all on multiple Zooms. I'd maybe been on 3 Zooms before COVID hit, but we're finally using the technology that lets us collaborate and stop competing to do good in the world, right? So what we need to do is work together to come up with a universal set of values. And I think what we'll find, and I know this has been proven in values-based polling, when you ask people, are you conservative or liberal or NDP or Green or Bloc? Or when you ask, are you Republican or Democrat? It's a very polarized conversation. But when you drill down to the values, to what people care about, we are united. About 74% of us worldwide tend to agree on some universal values like we want to leave a better world for our children. I'm willing to pay a little bit more for a product if I know her, human or animal was harmed in its creation, right? So even like on an issue as polarized as Roe v. Wade, if you talk to people about cherishing the sanctity of life, that's a very different conversation. And it's a conversation we have to have, because what good is it if a child is born, but lives in extreme poverty, is unwanted, never knows love, and grows up to make things worse, not better, right? So if we care about the sanctity of life, which so many of us do, then you don't feel good about children in cages. You don't feel good about not funding the most vulnerable among us, right? We have to shift the conversation into what our values are, rather than these issues that have only been created to divide and conquer us, right? They're polling issues. They're not real issues.
Rikia, I want to thank you for sharing the bees story, because I love that story. And I remember we had a fairly good conversation around that story. Like my overall intention for this year is deliberate weaving in. And it is Indigenous wisdom. It is, we know, we've spoken, for the last 20 years, we have, of my career, we've spoken to working together. And now I think the great pause has, it's woken people up to see that the biggest opportunities, and social profits and nonprofits have led, I would say, in this area. And then maybe Christina wants to kind of dig into, we all know if you're going after a big funding application, you better show partnerships, regional, cross, you better. And so there's some fundamental values, there's some fundamental things that we know we are needed to deliberately weave to do better. But I think sometimes when we pull that into the business world or entrepreneurship or innovation, I think some of those fundamental values get forgotten. And your bees story so rings true. And I spoke to an amazing impact champion this week, and I just said, asked some quick key questions like, where's your zone of genius? What do you feel happiest doing? What's the experience you want for yourself in the next 5 years for you? And be sure you're building to that experience. And then if there's synergies, how do we build together so that you have the experience you want and I have the experience I want? How do we deliberately weave as powerful women to ultimately create this experience? Because that's what it's all about, this whole thing called life, right? And so I'd like to kind of kick it over to Christina. I know some of what you said is ringing loud, and I'm curious, Christina, where this is taking you, where you'd like this to take us.
So there's a couple things that I want to grab onto, and that is, you talked about the shift in consciousness, right? And the fact that, I feel that in my own work, I get to have conversations now on a regular basis with not just women, with men and women in my work, where there is a shift in consciousness. I get to use a language, a soul language that is incredibly relevant, that I know I couldn't have, a decade ago or so, particularly when I was involved in politics. I feel that shift for sure. And I completely agree around the values based, like when you get underneath people's values. And what's interesting is part of my work is getting underneath the storytelling, getting under the waterline into the values for politicians that think they're on, you know, that they have a polarized view of things, and that it's really basic. I want to dig into the how, because I need to know I can have the conversations, but what I really want to know is how do we take it deeper and to the next level? How does it sink, and how does it infiltrate even deeper beyond conversational into just deeper?
Well, let's all take a deep breath. Because as women, we've been carrying this for a really long time. We have been trying to do this work, something that was sort of denigrated as emotional labor when it was finally recognized, but for so long not recognized, right? And we were taught that in order to succeed, particularly in business, it was a man's world, and we had to use a man's vocabulary, and we had to use the value set that was there. And so we were chameleons in projecting that, right? I was shocked when I took singing lessons to find out I'm a soprano, because I had gradually lowered and lowered my voice so that men would hear me around the boardroom table. And I'm feeling it kind of coming up now. But we've all survived in that world while doing this additional labor under the table, right? Making sure that people's needs were cared for, helping to show the power in partnerships, mentoring, inviting, connecting, amplifying other women's voices, right? But it's shifting in that men are starting to do that as well. They are starting to do it. I had a gentleman praised in a board meeting for something brilliant he said, and his reply was, "What are you talking about? Rakia says that all the time." And you know, that kind of gift is something that really exists. And so I think rather than feeling that we have to keep pushing the sled, I think all we need to do is look around and create awareness and hold that intention in our hearts, so that the people who are coming in now to support us in that work are also recognized and held and supported. Again, like this shift in consciousness and like these flips, you know, it's happening so quickly, really, relative to the world, that we just have to allow it, and we can stop pushing so hard. I feel quite strongly that like us versus them is over. You know, we've seen that pollutions and pandemics don't respect those tiny little lines we drew on a map, right? And so Bill Clinton said back in like 92, you know, we're moving from like moving into a global information economy. That was it. That it was more about ideas than it was about, you know, moving into post-nationalism. We're moving away from nationalism into a global information economy. You know, that was 30 years ago. And we're only just starting to realize it now. And in my experience, and if you've got experience in politics as well, you understand that things happen slowly and then they happen quickly. And we are heading into the quickly. So we're going to be grateful for that dark that gets us home in our jammies earlier than we thought. I really think that that all the false paradigms are over. Intersectionality is something we're all coming to understand. The connection between land and plants and animal and us being part of nature is something we're coming to understand. You know, we can all feel it when fire season comes and we can't breathe. I feel so powerfully that we're moving away from division and towards alliances. And don't let last night's presidential debate frighten you. It's just the last gasp of the old way, but it's not the future.
I just want to jump in on that one. I was like, oh, thank you for mentioning the debate. Not to go into the debate, because that's actually kind of my point. In story language, there's always this point between the second act and the third act where we look back and we go, oh my gosh, what have we done? did I make the right mistake? I mean, did I make the right choice? Maybe this was a mistake. I wish I could just go back. Wish I could just go back. And to speak to something that Charlene says a lot, she says, don't get distracted. Don't get distracted. And I think it's important I just want to highlight again some of your words around intentionality, and to remind anyone who hangs up from this and goes, yeah, but did you see the debate? Or somebody who sees on social media, they're posting something, and I mean, didn't CNN actually call it a shit show? Like, came right out and said, that was a shit show. I'm like, wow. Wow, right?
I heard one pundit say that he was paid to watch it and he still could barely make it through, you know?
Right? And just like in story language, when we craft a story, we actually craft that on purpose because it engages us. And then we have to make a choice. And I'm wondering if you can speak to I know you run into this. I know you speak to this. I can't think of a better voice to speak to this. The deeper part of our call to focus on that intentionality. Because not because it's scary, but because it's actually the time to stay forward and not get distracted. Can you speak to that?
I'm really grateful for that question. And the reason is, it's helped me see something that I was struggling with. The reason the debate was so painful for so many of us last night is because we're past that kind of thing, right? It's old paradigm. And it's nothing but holding up a mirror and showing us how far we've come, that regardless of political affiliation, most people were uncomfortable watching that old paradigm play itself out because our hearts aren't there anymore. That's not who we are. And so the discomfort, we could look at it and say, oh no, this is proof that the world isn't getting better and we're going to hell in a handbasket. Or we can look and say, wow, this is proof that we have evolved beyond this. And I said for many years that the people of Canada are far ahead of the leaders of Canada. But I think that that's a global trend now. And, you said Act 3 is the new known. And that's what I think is so fitting of this post-privacy world that we're entering, right? Where the truth there are no secrets to be hidden. In fact, we, who read 1984, were so afraid of government surveillance, we're self-surveilling. We are giving the world our whereabouts 24/7. We're giving the world what we think, believe, care about, don't like. We are revealing it all. There's nothing left to hide. And there's a liberation in that, right? I think this is a gift. I think the chaos is really transformation. We're lifting back the veil. There's nowhere to hide now. It doesn't surprise me one bit that Donald Trump's tax returns were revealed after people were trying to get them for, a decade really. And we're seeing a bit of a tumultuous time in terms of the downfall of some public figures. And it makes some of us afraid to become public figures because we all have mistakes in our past. We all have things we've done wrong, and cancel culture makes us feel that one mistake has made it impossible for us to then be in the room. And I want to share one of our family rules, which is, if you learn from it, it's not a mistake, it's a lesson. And so whenever my kids said that they made a mistake or they whatever, I would just say, okay, what are you going to do differently next time? Because now you haven't made a mistake, now you've learned a lesson, and that's a totally different framing. And I think that those of us who've learned from things, I can think of several times in my life, not that many, but a time that I might have joked about something that we shouldn't joke about. But I only learned that from seeing the crestfallen look on my friends' faces reflected back to me. That was a lesson, and I never wanted to hurt somebody again. And so I became more careful and more wise. And if we can all try and do that, and if we can do it from the heart, I don't think the world is going to fault us for having made a mistake. I think the world will fault you for making that mistake over and over and over and refusing to learn from it, even if you know you have hurt someone. And so, you know, I think it's important to apologize to people who've been hurt, but don't apologize for being you, which is like a living, breathing, learning organism, because humans learn by making mistakes. You know, that's how we learn. And so as long as we're moving forward and as long as we're learning, you know, all of our experiences, all of our boundaries, all of our values, they become the scaffolding to become who you are in the world. And what's really interesting, I have an unusual name. It's I got both my Lebanese grandmother and my French grandmothers. I got both of their names, Rikia Marie, and I never wanted to be Rikia. It was so ethnic, and I wanted to be Andrea and have the nickname Andy because it was kind of androgynous. I thought that was cool as a tomboy, and it took me a long time to grow into my name, and it took me even longer to realize that your diversity is your permission to be in the room. It's why your voice matters. It's why you have something to bring to the conversation. If it's all a bunch of people who look the same and have had the same life experience around the table, then you're not going to have a great conversation. And I want to say one last thing about diversity. I know that, you know, my cousins and I would call ourselves beige, and I know that that's pretty close to white. And I, especially with what I call my white girl hair, I can pass quite easily. You don't look at me and say, oh, she grew up in a Muslim, Catholic, Jewish family in Treaty 8. But there are a lot of kinds of diversity that we miss when we only focus on skin color. Skin color can be such a terrible impediment in the world because our systems and structures haven't caught up to the wisdom and beauty of so many of cultures and what they have to offer, rather than just looking at the otherness. But also, when we're talking about bringing diversity into the room, there's sexual orientation, which has become so normalized, thank God, but it can bring a different perspective that is essential. Growing up in a rural environment is a different perspective. Growing up having family in the old country, growing up in a more traditional home or religious home, all of these things are part of the human experience, and we need all of that kind of diversity. And so I don't want to start cancel culturing white men, because they too share many of these types of diversity. And if they allow themselves to embrace the lessons that they actually learn from those experiences, they too can bring something very rich to the conversation, which I think is important.
Oh my goodness, so much good stuff. I am going to ask us to do a little bit of a closing circle to the formal part of the conversation, because I can imagine there's some thoughts and questions that want to be expressed. And I'm going to encourage Rakia and my co-hosts, if you're willing to play with me. It's a bit of just a little bit on the spot. What comes to mind? So when I think about the third act that I am walking into, one of the pieces, one of the steps, the first steps that I am working on, and I'm not, great at it. I wrote down, what am I ready to grow into? One of the things that I think we could do in a much more effective and intentional way is how we introduce ourselves to others. And one of the things that I really am trying to learn from my Indigenous friends and sisters is how they introduce themselves. And it's so beautiful, and they take time. You immediately know within a couple of minutes where they're from, a little bit about their family. And I thought to myself, as we're working on this intentional intersectionality, if we could just pause and just take another minute and introduce ourselves in a deeper, more meaningful way. And so as you're speaking to me and you'll hear me, I practice because I trip over it and I don't feel worthy of fully owning it. But and I have a good friend, as does Tina, who introduces herself, and you always know in her introduction, she proclaims her happiness about her marriage to her wife. It's her how she grounds her feet. This is who I am, and it's in every introduction. And so for me, first steps forward from here, will be around more intentionally introducing myself to really build some deeper connections and intentionality. And I'm just curious with my co-hosts and then finishing off with Rikia, what comes to mind for you in a tangible first step forward from here that relates back to this conversation? Christina, do you want to kick in?
Sure. My tangible takeaway for today is actually, I'm reminded that my work in the world is to raise the level of consciousness in locally elected leaders, and so not to hide that in any way, and just stay the course. And it's more about being conscious than less about just doing more. It's actually being conscious and modeling and pushing the envelope in the modeling. So
I love that.
Oh, I actually need to read it all and sit with it again. But I think the piece that's most present, that has like a real ring for it for me still, is something you said at the very, very, very beginning to inform my first steps forward. And it was really recognizing that the kind of like the heavy lifting's already been done. And I've been playing with this phrase in my head of, what am I picking up? What am I putting down? What am I picking up? What am I putting down? And so as I move forward, it makes me emotional to say that, that I'm going to be in a practice of putting down an old story of carrying the heaviness of that I'd say that me as a woman has been carrying. And what can I pick up that's lighter? Yeah, thank you.
Final thoughts, Rakia. What do first steps forward feel like for you? A takeaway on your own conversation.
Well, I'm going to learn a lot more about storytelling. I really, I think that that's important, because it's one thing to have these ideas and these thoughts, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. You know, the idea of this conversation came from you and I talking on the phone, and you know, until you're invited in, until I'm invited in, maybe it's just my archetype or something, but I don't start organizing my thoughts in a way to gift them until I'm asked. I don't just bring things out of the blue. It's not in my nature. I think moving forward, there's lots of takeaways for all of us. You know, don't they, them, other. What we've learned in the social change arena and in the global aid arena is that it's time to stop doing for people what you think those people need, and it's time to start asking people what we can accomplish together. You know, there's much to be said about the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a global effort to bring 17 changes to this earth. And when we started out, it was a very top-down colonial exercise still, right? We're going to go help these poor countries achieve these goals. But the fact is, we're only 10 years away from the final target, and not a single country in the world, including our own, including Scandinavia, has achieved all of these goals. And so we need to start looking a lot more. There is no us, there is no them, we're all in this together. And I think, you know, listening to the quiet voices in the room, sharing your gifts as much as you can, even if you have to do a corny Facebook post that says, anyone need any help? Realizing those power in partnerships, you know, and also not fearing the truth and knowing that it's coming out, and just putting some boundaries around who you are and how you want to be in this world. I think that we have the power to ride this out and to see a much better world when we come to the other side.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank Rikia for being with us this morning, to my co-hosts and to all of you for another Gather for Her.